I will be recording a band in a professional studio, using thousands of dollars of mics and hardware. It'll be a live session with all the musicians playing at the same time. They have an API 1608. I want to know, how should I go prepared for my first recording in a professional studio? Should I record everything pure or use a compressor or EQ for some instruments? After the recording, I will mix it in my studio. I think by the very nature of you asking whether you should compress or EQ, I would say no. I would say no because if you don't feel confident going into a situation knowing exactly, what kind of EQ or compression to use on certain instruments, I just wouldn't do any. You can always apply plugins on the session as it's being recorded if you wanted to sound closer to what it could be on a playback. But as you've probably heard from many, many professionals that we've interviewed over the years on Produce Like a Pro, many people will, of course, the great Al Schmidt and the amazing Tommy Vicari come to mind, two incredible engineers and mixers that have recorded big bands and orchestras. They always work on the principle of move the mic to the right place. So I would spend less time worrying about compression and EQ and more time about getting the microphone in the right place. And by the sounds of it, because it's a live session, as much separation as you can. You are going to get instruments bleeding into each other unless they've got tons and tons of ISO booths and tons of great baffling. The reality is there will be some bleed, and you can use that to your advantage. I think of Shelley Yakis, who actually loved that. He would record bands live at a lower level and baffle somewhat, but ultimately his records had this feeling of a live performance. So I think it's a blessing. I think you're going to be in a situation where you've got a wonderful console, a 1608, which I absolutely love. I used on the second Frey record for almost the entire record. An amazing console. Although I will say you've only got 16 inputs. So when you're saying you're tracking a lot of musicians live, I'm assuming it's a 4 or 5 piece band. If it's going to be bigger than that, then you might run out quite quickly. Really depends how many people are singing, if there's extra players involved. But 1608 is an absolutely incredible console. I think if I was starting a studio again, I could easily have a 1608 as a centerpiece for my studio and have all the drums and most of the tracks going through that, and then maybe a couple of external pre's, etc. But it's a beautiful, beautiful sounding console. I cannot overstate how good that console is. So you should have a wonderful time. Get in there, place the microphones in the best possible positions to reduce the amount of bleed so it's manageable. If you want to apply any EQ, maybe a little bit of high passing for instruments that, don't need the low end bleed in them. Getting rid of low rumble out of a vocal mic, etc. is a smart thing to do. But ultimately, if you have any concerns whatsoever and you don't feel confident, then just do the compression and the EQ afterwards. I think it makes perfect sense. Capture big, fat tones, and take it back to your studio and mix it. Just get that bleed down to a minimum. It's going to be in there, but just get it down to a minimum. I find when I'm tracking live instruments, I'm leaning a little heavier on dynamic microphones that have better rejections. 57s start getting put in lots of different places. If I'm using a very beautiful vintage 47, it can be great if there's good baffling, but a 47 on a vocal mic with a band around it is pretty much a room mic as well as a vocal mic. What I would do is do a little bit of reconnaissance, find out about the studio, find out every detail about the musicians, what instruments they play, get the stage set up, figure it all out in advance, and you can pretty much plot where you're going to put them, how you're going to baffle them off, and even choose the microphones before you arrive. Preparation is the best thing in this situation.